Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to our Wednesday Heart Wisdom panel through Mango Publishing. And it's so nice to see all of you here. Thank you for being here live, and thank you to anyone who's watching the replay. This is going to be a really special Wednesday because we have Marilyn and Aundrea both here to share with us about strength and sisterhood. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of wonderful things connected with creating community with purpose. And they're going to tell some stories of some amazing things that are in their book. And yeah, and we welcome you all. They're going to do a little bit of introducing themselves, and they each brought something to read. And then at some point we'll open it up. So, as we're going along, if you have questions, we'll have a time when you can ask them questions or share your comments. So why don't we get started? Marilyn, how about if you introduce yourself and you can hold up your book and share with us where you are and what you're up to right now.
Well, hi, everyone. This is our book, for those of you who haven't seen it, Friendship, Resistance, and Untold Truths Behind Black Student Activism in the 1960s. And it's a choral memoir written by 8 of us, 7 sisters and 1 brother, we call ourselves, about our experience as activists. This has been a year of activism, and we're getting calls from many young people saying, tell us what you learned that can help us and can give us hope. And so definitely at the core of what we did was the sisterhood. That's why we named us, that's why we named the book. We were called the 7 Sisters. It was a name that was attributed to us. We weren't related, but the way we lived and acted as students brought that to mind. It was a play on the 7 sister colleges. We were also pretty geeky, I guess, nerdy or something. And so it kind of tied in that in those days, the women's colleges, the 7 women's colleges of the Ivy League were single gender colleges. So we were thought of as these very academic young ladies, and then on top of that, we were so close. So there was a sisterhood. So it was a combination of being activists and being very academic. So we got that name, and it was a friendship that was behind it all. And it has survived over 50 years. And it's really just gotten stronger, I would say. And 2 of our co-authors are on, and they hadn't planned to be on, but they were able to get there, Myra and Joyce, so we're really happy. But that's the kind of thing we've always tried to be there for each other. And we're still doing it. So there's a lot to be said. I guess I'll just say one thing, and this is in no order, but it just came to mind. I think it was last Saturday or the Saturday before, there was an online funeral, of a woman who had been in the cafeteria, a worker in the cafeteria back in the 70s when we were there. And she died of cancer. And her daughter, whom I didn't know at all, but apparently while the mother and father were both working in the cafeteria, all through the years, they always invited students to their home, And so the whole generation of college students after us who would be invited to this home, and they got to know their 2 daughters. So one of the daughters grew up to be a fabulous gospel singer. And I got to know her from joining the gospel choir. So this was a sisterhood wherein a person who was a cafeteria worker, she was, she became sisterhood with the students, the young black students who were homesick and hungry for food and spiritual encouragement. And she invested in them. And this relationship went on for 40 years of her singing with the choir, her daughter singing with the choir. And then, if you can hardly imagine, on February 6th, there was a double funeral. Mother and the daughter both died in the same week. And, the whole choir was devastated. These are all choir members from the college. And the tributes that poured out for them, the daughter, I think, had COVID. The mother had cancer. It was just one of these nightmares of our time. But the tributes that came for them, and if you talk about sisterhood, the love, it crossed social class, across education, across everything. And that was typical of the kinds of relationships that were formed, not only in our time, but after we left. So it just struck me last night that, you know, this idea of sisterhood and how it was so strengthening and pervasive. And the funeral was a celebration. It's as only you can have in a Black Pentecostal church. People are shouting and singing and rejoicing because they know these two women are in heaven. And you know, it was just something to behold. It was just wondrous. And we were well represented, the students who came after us that were part of that. So that's just one of the things that is another story. That's an up-to-date, very current situation. And that, you know, her legacy will go on. So it's an example of the sisterhood that carried us. And I was thinking last night, there's this PBS program going on now called The Black Church, that I think a number of people have seen. It was on last night and it's going to continue tonight. And Oprah Winfrey was on there saying, you know, she's a product of the Black church. And I would say for certainly Aundrea and myself, we would say we're a product of the Black church. And certainly these two women that died are the product of the Black church. And I think when we talk about sisterhood, for many Black people, it is that phrase calling ourselves sisters really comes from the church. And, you know, we may not be biological sisters, but we recognize God as our Father, and that makes us sisters, right? And so we, so much of what we experience, so much of what we do, so much of how we share and what we live is taught us by the way we see women interact in the church. And so when we went to college, it's just a natural continuation of that. And it's just such a part of our culture. And that's something to me that they're celebrating that in the PBS special at this time. It's so true. It's so real. It's not fake. It's not something somebody's inventing. It is quintessentially what the sisterhood is about. And so that's just my quick version of what's happening now for me.
Oh, Marilyn, thank you so much. I feel like already, like you brought us right center into all of this. And oh, what a, you know, I'm sorry, what a huge loss of mother and daughter. And yet, like you said, like such a beautiful example of just crossing, just like with you guys too, like just crossing all these years and experiences. And that was beautiful. Thank you. And I know we're going to circle back and you've got something to read for us, but let's have Aundrea say hello and just introduce yourself. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, just a quick hello. Marilyn, when you were talking about the older folks, the custodians and the waitresses and the housekeepers at Swarthmore College, the Black ones, we always knew that they had our back. And they really were sisters. And I just think of how we make the point in the book that basically when you go to college, the college is supposed to serve as your parent. You know, you have the phrase in loco parentis. Well, for us, it was those maids and those janitors and those waitresses in the cafeteria that kind of were our parents and made sure we were okay, without hovering over us or being helicopter-like as some parents are today. But those relationships that we had at the college with those sisters, those count. They do count as well. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So I've been spending a lot of my time during my retirement and my confinement at my home here in Henderson, Nevada, online. And trying to do some things that I enjoyed, but never had the time to do. And so I signed up for some courses with an organization called the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, OLLI, which it's a project that is at a number of colleges and universities in the country. And I signed up for 3 courses. Oh. I signed up, and I think I mentioned this before, I signed up to be in a choir, but that went by the wayside because of the pandemic. So I switched over, I signed up for a course called Parables in Movies, parables in movies and television shows. It's very interesting. We get together once a week. We'll have watched 2 or 3 movies, and then we try to find out if there are any stories from or parables from the Bible that come through in the movie. So there might be someone that comes alongside someone who's in trouble, for example, and comforts them, and that could represent like the Spirit of God or that kind of thing. So that's one class. Another class, I always wanted to learn how to play an instrument. I never really had the money as a child. My parents couldn't afford it. So I decided to sign up for ukulele. So I'm now on my 2nd semester of ukulele. I can actually play a couple of little songs, and I signed up. I enjoyed it so much that I signed up for a 3rd class where we pick songs and we sing them and play the ukulele for ourselves. So believe it or not, at this stage in my life, I'm learning an instrument. That's my little kind of fun, I guess, selfish pleasure, guilty pleasure. I guess you call it a guilty pleasure.
Aundrea, do you think we could convince you to play a little something for us at some point? I'm so tickled.
Maybe, we'll see.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll see. If we're all good, you might. I love that. It's so beautiful. So beautiful. So let's go. I know that you both brought something to read to sort of start our conversation off and get us in this place. And Marilyn, you want to start us with your reading?
Okay. So I just read a little bit from Myra's here, and I don't want to pick on her and ask her to read. So Myra, I'm reading part of your chapter, and I don't know, I'm sure you wouldn't mind. I said, I know I could do that. I know Myra wouldn't mind. So I'm taking the part where she describes the dining hall and the way we used to interact when we were in college. And the dining hall was called Sharples. And so Sharples was a beautiful dining hall near the edge of the central Swarthmore campus. There was plenty of multi-use space with large common rooms, tables for 2, semi-private rooms, and closed small reading rooms that could be reserved. The serving line was a thing of wonder with fresh salad, hot yeast rolls, drinks, desserts, and several entrees. I had never tasted real butter, broccoli, or asparagus before. Several other food surprises like matzo balls and corned beef that did not come out of a can was certainly not anything I'd ever experienced. It was a culinary adventure land. Most days, lunch and dinner tended to be leisurely affairs, except for us science majors, who often had afternoon labs that interrupted many an interesting conversation. Sharples was where I met, that's Myra, I met most of the other Black students. Some I only knew by sight. Others would actually sit down and share a meal with fellow Black people, and some never did. These group dinner experiences were a thing of beauty. Sharples was where we became the 7 sisters. The 7 of us were a nuclear family, and I thought of us as such with Joyce as our mother. The Marilyns were our older sisters, and the 4 freshmen were excited teenagers who had finally gotten free of our mothers and could come out to play, learn, study, and experience true freedom for the first time. Sam Shepard, a thoughtful, quiet upperclassman, noted our girl group affinity and started referring to us as the 7 sisters, a thinly veiled homage to the Ivy League's 7 sister women colleges of New England, and the name stuck. At first, the stories we shared were about our families, home, and the different lives we came from. Harold, the brother in the book, a sophomore math major from semi-rural New York, was the only male who became an integral part of the group. We thought of ourselves as the 7 sisters plus 1. Other Black students came and went from the table, but Harold stayed. Group conversations were the norm, exuberant and rowdy. We eventually gravitated to a semi-secluded, medium-sized dining alcove just off the main dining area where we felt free to be ourselves with ourselves. Some called it the Black table and stated that we were segregating ourselves. But eating meals and socializing together just seemed natural. I never thought of the table as self-imposed segregation. It was just family having a family meal. In many respects, it was like my family gathering at home in Norfolk, with people coming in and out, ebbing and flowing like the tide. Everyone at the table had different experiences, and I loved it. Black students at Swarthmore accepted me as I was, and that was a great feeling. People largely accepted you for who you were at Swarthmore. I never felt I had to conform. The cool kids were just as individualistic as I was. I was definitely no longer the smartest person in the room, which is an entirely new feeling for me. I was glad to know that there were people who were smart or smarter than I. Smart kids in my hometown were estranged from most people, and the school herd mentality leaves the academically gifted isolated, set apart, knowing that there's something different about them. At Swarthmore, I was just a regular student, as bright as the rest. As the dining room circle expanded, the outside world intruded, especially the events of the civil rights movement. Stories of the contrast between raw Southern racism and Northern and Midwestern racism resonated with all of us. Black consciousness became a part of life. We educated ourselves and each other through conversation, reading suggestions, and meetings at Swarthmore as well as off campus. Without my sisters, I felt alone and surrounded by the same indifference I had experienced in high school. In the presence of my sisters, there was warmth and understanding. We could talk about hair, fashion, politics, schoolwork, anything. My birth family was reconstituted with 7 sisters and Harold. So that's just a little flavor, and thanks to Myra for penning that, capturing how we became a family. And just sisterhood and family was everything to us. We did it by just eating together and talking together just about every meal. So at least twice a day, lunch and dinner, we'd spend that time, and we'd linger long after meals and just talk about our lives. We didn't necessarily feel comfortable sharing our lives with the mainstream students because they didn't understand our lives. Most of us were first generation college students. Our parents hadn't gone to college typically. We couldn't sit around and say what books our parents had published or with their fancy jobs. And we didn't know that other people might be interested in our stories. So we were reticent, we wouldn't share. But together, when we discovered that we had so much in common, we could just flow with all the family stories. So we got to know all of each other's siblings. And, I still know Aundrea's siblings. She's amazed that I still remember when her sister got married. And we just knew everything about each other's family because we became family. And we felt acceptance. And this is so important. And of course, people who observed us because we stood out as being the only Black students, people immediately took it as an affront that we were segregating ourselves. And so it became a threat, when in fact, we desperately needed each other and we needed that support and affirmation. And it wasn't any kind of attack on anybody else. It was about something we needed. And fortunately, we were able to lay claim to that and build on it. And it was the beginning of our sisterhood, just sitting around those meals. And one of the things we were saying recently was, we talk a lot. We talk endlessly. We could go on for hours. But in all that conversation, you get a lot of clarity. Yeah. And if you want to talk about the strengths of sisterhood, and if you have sisters, you probably know this. You have a chance to just talk about your parents. You talk about your everything. And in the process, in a multitude of counselors, there's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of clarity. And so one of the strengths I think of having sisters and having sisterhood and talking a lot is that, you get to really know who you are. You have articulated it, you've been challenged, and you develop a strength that someone from the outside can't come and knock you off your game and tell you who you're not and who you're not who you are, because you've rehearsed this so many times with that little group and honed it. And if you said something silly, someone would call you out and say, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? And you have to rework it. But by the end of the day, you'd all be pretty clear about who you were. And in hindsight, those dinner conversations that went on forever probably strengthened us more than anything else. So later on, when we got involved in the activism and we had to really put our trust in each other, we knew exactly who everyone was. So I love Myra's description. Thanks for writing that, Myra.
Thank you, Myra, oh, that was so beautiful. And Marilyn, thank you for choosing that and starting us with that. I could feel, it was just, I felt like I was right there when you were reading it, and you could feel the closeness. And you and I had the chance to talk a little bit before we all came on live about that trust. And I love that you circled back to that just now, because when we were talking about your friendships and how, like you said, everybody's fundamentally who they always were. And it's so beautiful the way you described finding yourselves through each other, through those conversations. So beautiful. I love that. What a great thing to read and share.
Great.
Yeah. Aundrea, do you want to say anything about that before you read, or you want to jump right in?
I was just going to say, I was recalling also, Marilyn, you mentioned all the time we spend at Sharples in the dining hall around the table, and then that was in the daytime. Sometimes it went into late in the evening. And then when we weren't there, we would be in each other's dorm rooms studying, or more likely talking about politics, about boys, about music, about swimming, the swimming requirement, and about how Swarthmore needed to change to accommodate us. That was a common conversation. And they did, eventually.
We had the confidence, we gained the confidence to assert what we needed.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. What have you got for us, Aundrea?
So a really short reading from a section called Black History Celebration Sewing Circle. So it's about a time that we decided we would come together during Black History Month, and we were going to make some clothes, some African-inspired clothes, especially for the guys, some dashikis. So this tells the story of how that came to be. Unlike the contemporary ski chalet design of Sharples Dining Hall, Bond Hall was a maze of Black 1- and 2-story medieval stone buildings with thick, heavy wooden doors and metal-framed windows that opened outward by pushing metal rods attached to the windowsills. In the absence of an official gathering space of our own, SAS made creative use of Bond Hall in ways it had probably never been used before. SAS is a Swarthmore African American Students Association. You could walk from one small Bond building to another through below-ground passageways and uncarpeted spaces big enough for working on an art project or drama rehearsal. On the ground level were carpeted living room-like spaces warmly lit by lamps and rarely bright even in daytime hours, with a huge grand piano and for some time a harpsichord on one end. The room could host a small audience for a chamber music concert, or students gathered to hear speakers sitting cross-legged on the floor as readily as on the well-padded armchairs. At other times, teachers gave music lessons there, or groups and individuals practiced vocals or instruments. For us, Bond was a favorite place to listen to reports on the progress of liberation movements in Southern Africa, or to jazz artists who sang or played to mesmerized fans. Other parts of Bond Hall housed upper-level female students in bedroom suites, and by 1968, several of the SAS women lived there. In winter 1968, we saw the possibility of converting an area in the lower level into a hidden assembly line for creating a couple of dozen African-style dashiki shirts for our SAS brothers. The shirts would be surprise gifts for each of them at the Black History Week dinner that we were also planning. It may have been Jeanette and the Marilyns who arranged for the college van to drop a group of us off at the shopping area near campus where you could purchase fabric. The shoppers had returned loaded down with a dozen or more bolts. Finding in a mainstream store cloth designs that could be arranged to simulate West African fashion was not easy. Artistic creativity was needed to identify fabric otherwise destined to cover throw pillows or to drape windows, and repurpose it to create bold designs for chest and back that matched precisely at side seams. We gathered portable sewing machines and steam irons that we had brought from home and set up an assembly line on the Bond Hall basement tables. with space enough to lay out fabric, measure, cut, and stitch enough for the 24 or more Black male students on campus. At every step, there was excited laughing and anticipation of the success of this creative endeavor. Those sisters who were more experienced guided the others, and everyone contributed what they knew. To safeguard the surprise, we had not taken the guys' actual measurements, so all the females involved participated in estimating neck sizes, waists, back height from memory for each of the brothers. The cloth cutting was punctuated by hysterical laughter as we selected which colorful design would look best on which brother. Does it really take that much fabric to go around Bob? That was my boyfriend at the time. Laughter again as the rest of us stopped our job stitching or pressing seams to gape in disbelief at the amount of fabric the more experienced, like Joyce and Aundrea, had cut for a more portly brother. Sisters like Myra and Bridget kept track of the inventory, making sure we didn't forget anyone, and sharing and distributing the tasks of machine stitching seams and hand stitching hems. While the cutting and sewing could have been tedious, we experienced it as a restorative and fulfilling communal engagement, reminiscent of the quilting bees for which Black women of the South were famous. While we worked our assembly line, as always, we exchanged funny stories about our families or campus lives and entertained ourselves. We could intersperse the laughter with problem-solving the challenges of SAS and of life on the margins of the campus. It was projects like this where the legend of the Seven Sisters was likely cemented. We became known among Black students on and off campus as much for our intense ideological discussions and political activism as we were for our hard work cooking, baking, sewing, and organizing dinners and parties. There were other mostly younger sisters who worked alongside the Seven. Ava from Chicago, Francine from Tennessee, and several others were committed to our culturally affirming projects. The relationships we forged as we worked hands-on were rich and hard to find in mainstream campus organizations and extracurricular activities. In 2 or 3 evening sessions over perhaps a single week or slightly more, in spite of all of our other academic obligations, we got the job done. As each brother arrived on the celebration evening and tentatively donned the handmade dashiki with his name pinned on it, the sisters held our collective breath until we saw how closely our estimated sizes had fit. When it worked perfectly, there were oohs and ahs. Here and there was a taller guy whose height we had underestimated, with a shirt that ended a little too far above the hips, or one with a smaller frame, where the neck was cut too wide, or where the sleeves reached too low. We have a few photographs of brothers just beaming with surprise, seated around the tables, each dressed like African royalty. Relationships between the male and female Black students on campus had sometimes been tense, with misunderstandings. This Black History Week dinner and sewing project, among all the activities we experienced together until that point, may have generated the most healing. Looking at photographs that remain of the dinner, the smiles on the faces of the young men that day affirmed that we had made real the 60s rhetoric of African unity and economic self-sufficiency. They had indeed become our brothers.
Oh, I love that you chose that particular story. That was one of the things that I just was so touched when I read in your book. What made you choose that one, Aundrea?
Well, it shows that some of the same strategies, some of the same collective purposes that our ancestors participated in, like the quilting bees, we were doing some of the same things without even realizing it, having some of the same kinds of experiences, pulling people together. That was a collective purpose just as much as the purpose of having Swarthmore be more responsive to us as Black people. That was just as significant for some of us.
Yeah, I'm so moved and inspired when I hear the two of you talk, and from all the stories from everyone in the book, it's like how much you were all able to be and do and accomplish and grow into during that time. I'm just curious, do you want to speak to that at all? It almost feels to me like you were like these super women, you know?
Well, we think about that a lot because, you know, it's hard to believe we were like 19. You know, typical age at that time was like 19. I don't even know if we were 20. But one of the things we discovered when we sat down to write the book was how much we were inspired by our parents' example. You know, each of us, we were just amazed. 8 of us sitting down, telling our story to each other for the first time as adults, and just talking about our families of origin. And I think without exception, we all came from these families where our parents were givers, you know, they were givers. I think at least, you know, so many, first of all, we all had fathers, which is somewhat amazing because fathers who were in the home with us.
Yeah.
Which is somewhat unusual to 8 out of 8 to have all had fathers in the home, and fathers who demonstrated generosity. You know, they've taken relatives from either the Caribbean or from the South. And, you know, we all had these stories of cousins and in-laws that been brought into the home, and we didn't have big homes, right? So, you know, we were taught generosity and responsibility from our parents. Look out for other people, and it didn't have to be relatives. It could be neighbors. It could be people in trouble. But we all had these amazing stories of outreach and generosity and hard work, people having multiple jobs, being active in church, you know, sewing, cooking, reading the Bible, having Bible study, prayer meeting. I mean, that's what many of our mothers did, held down jobs, raising so many children, and then taking in relatives. So we thought, so we were, I don't know how to put it, Aundrea, you can pick me up on that point there. It's just,
I think also we found that many of our parents had been active within the community, activists. I believe that Myra's father was a journalist, and a newspaper writer who wrote articles. And, you know, my parents were very active in terms of education and trying to organize neighbors and so forth to do more about Boston's terrible education system. So it was that time, it was not only the time of our parents could become more active, but also they were examples for what we could do.
Yeah. So I think that it was just a role model that came naturally to us. We didn't think we were doing anything heroic. Mm-hmm. And we studied and got our grades all at the same time, and still had a lot of fun. So we don't know how we did it either without cell phone, email.
Right. But I'm guessing, and you know, you can speak a little bit more to this, like again, that it's like you had this group like that already, just in a short time. I think we've all gotten a sense for just the sisterhood, right? And I'm curious if that's part. I mean, I feel as if community can serve us in that way so well. Everybody gets lifted. Right. I mean, do you feel like were you constantly inspiring one another in that way?
Right. Yes, I think so. I said, for one thing, talking a lot strengthens you in clarifying your own thoughts, you know, and you're rubbing them up against other people and you're getting feedback. So that's one thing that makes you stronger in your commitment. Then you're not easily derailed, you know. So if somebody disappoints you in your life or a leader fails, you know who you are and you know what you're about, and you're not going to collapse because somebody you looked up to didn't do what they were supposed to do. I think that sisterhood has a way, it's like the Bible talks about iron sharpening iron. You're just kind of honed. In fact, I decided to look up some scriptures on this. If you don't be careful, I wind up preaching today. I'll try not to. In Ecclesiastes, you know, there's in chapter 4, Solomon says, you know, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor, right? That's chapter 4. Then it says, if either one of them falls down, one can help the other up, right? if two lie down together, they will keep each other warm, right? And if one is overpowered, two can defend themselves, right? And then it says a cord of three strands is
not easily broken.
Not easily broken. And that's what sisterhood does for you. You know, it does all those things. And not being derailed, I think, is very important at times like this, because people have put their hope in leaders who disappointed them. And if you have a confidence in your beliefs, and you have a core group of people that have integrity, even if the leader, the titular leader or whatever turns out to be a disappointment, you don't have to lose your path. You know, I think that's what sisterhood can do. And so it's a strength. When we talk about strength, that's not a small word. We also become good leaders ourselves because of the type of interaction. We learn to encourage each other. Good leaders encourage. And we're able to do that because we get a lot of practice with encouraging. And I think part of the whole sisterhood thing is, and we didn't say this before, but we were downplayed. Most people didn't know we were behind the movement, the takeover. They thought the guys were doing it. We stepped back and let the guys get all the attention. They were all the ones in the media, the press. As far as anybody reading the media were concerned, this entire movement on campus was led by men. And it was the women who were leading it, but we just stepped back and we let the guys take the lead, take the role, and we were able to focus on what we, needed to focus on to make sure that things were in order. We weren't running to be out to be seen and to be noticed, and that made us stronger. So it's interesting sometimes when you're in the position where you're not getting recognized, it can work to your advantage because you're not as distracted. You're not as distracted by the press,
Oh, that's so good. That's so interesting. Yeah. Aundrea, did you want to add to that? And then I think I'll open it up and see if people want to ask some questions.
I think that Marilyn pretty much said it all. Yeah. And something that's not surprising because I was thinking back as you were talking about our experience, as we've been talking about our experiences, how during the takeover itself, yes, outside of the admissions office, where there was a lot of activity going on, and the male leaders of SAS were issuing statements. They were giving statements and making demands and so forth. But what those on the outside didn't know was that it was the women who were sitting around the table writing out what the strategy would be, what the speeches, what the content would be, and then would give it to the guys, and then they would go out and so. But for a larger cause, that's okay. You don't always have to be the one out in front. I often say that when I sing in the choir, I like to stand in the back row. I don't have to be the soloist. And so I think we had some of that kind of an attitude of being willing to not have to be the one in front in order to get the job done.
But what just occurred to me is I'm so pleased that right here, right now, here you are, the voice of sharing so much of this with us. Here you are being our leaders, and I know, as Marilyn had pointed out, to so many of the youth of today also, they're turning to you, and that's so beautiful. And I'm so glad for that, because you do carry so much wisdom to share.
Thank you.
Let's see if anybody wants to jump in and ask a question or share a comment. You can just unmute yourself if you want to. Brenda, I see, were you raising your hand?
I unmuted myself. I just wondered if you still feel, I know your book came out to great acclaim and it's still getting readers and things like that, but I wonder if you sort of still feel uncredited because I feel like more credit is due, but I wonder if you feel like, okay, we made it happen, it's all good.
Yeah, Aundrea, you want to try that one?
It's all good now. It's all good now. I guess one could say that it might have been a little disappointing at first to think that the women in some of the official, well, women weren't always given the credit, but that's okay, because still it's the purpose that has to be accomplished, and so the job that has to get done, so that's okay in this particular case.
Yeah, step by step, we'll take progress step by step.
And I guess a lot depends on individuals' personalities as well. I've never been the kind of person that has to have a lot of attention. So.
You're very lucky.
One of my sisters might have a different response.
Well, I wanted to say, this is Joyce Frisby Baines. I'm one of the authors as well. And I wanted to say that one of the reasons that we wrote the book is that we wanted to set the record straight. We wanted people to know the truth behind the movement and behind the takeover, because they had not really seen that. They had not really heard that. They had not really read that. And we thought that was very important. And just as Marilyn said, conversation and talk kind of clarifies who you are. I think we found that writing clarifies thought as well. And that, you know, we had to think through a lot of things as we were writing and clarifying really just what it was that we wanted to say. So I just wanted to add that.
Oh, thank you, Joyce. That was great. Really, really helpful and interesting.
I have one more question.
Jump on in, Brenda.
So how do we get like your book to be made into like a really cool documentary by like Aya DuVernay or like the Netflix series that the Obamas are doing? How can we make that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so pathetic. Yeah. We are open. And we have had Marilyn Howfield has had arranged with a dance, a modern dance. Is that Peter Morgan in Miami, and he has a troupe, and they did her chapter. They danced. They choreographed the dance based on her chapter, and he's promising to come back and choreograph some of the other chapters to tell the story through dance.
It's nice.
And it's very powerful.
I like that.
Oh, Elaine, how you doing? Good. So we've had that dance. There was a mini documentary done at the college before we wrote the book to try to capture it. It's about 40 minutes, 35 or 40 minutes. But we are also open to a real dramatic representation, not a documentary, but a dramatic telling of the story. Something like The Hidden Figures, it's an analogy there where these women are behind the scenes making a difference. And yet the story was presented in a dramatic way. And we're looking to get the right sensitivity, the kind of screenwriting and that can really capture the sensitivity of who we really are as people, and because it's the real people that make these movements happen. People will fixate on the takeover, and they like to talk about the dramatic takeover and the sit-in and the conflict. But that's just the icing on the cake, really. That the sit-in, all the organizing, all the teaching, all the years of building credibility, and making this big institution change its ways. That wasn't done just by an 8-day sit-in. It took continuous years of activism, and all of us in our work, we've all gone out in different areas, and we've had to be in these institutions that don't want to change, and we've had to do the same thing, push against the system. Don't give up, keep articulating, keep advocating. This is not right. This can be done better. So, it's that constant pushing. that's where the action is. And if you can capture that in a dramatic telling, I think that's more valuable even than the drama of a takeover, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's to get the right screenwriters, I guess, I think, to really capture the essence. It's just as important, the stories of who we are as people, as much as the activity that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have one without the other.
Oh, I'm excited. Brenda, I love that you just put that out there. I'm looking at everyone here thinking someone's got to have, you know, yeah, some way to make this happen. So awesome. Fonda, I know you had posted a question. Did you want to jump in?
Sure. One of the programs that I'll be watching, I believe tonight, is the Black Church on PBS for another group that I'm in. And I just wanted to ask any of the authors here, I'm so impressed with your sense of community and of how the women sewed together and your dining experiences together and so forth. And I recently learned about the wearing of hats in the Black church, and this is in the South. So I know that neither of you are in the South, but perhaps you're aware of this in a cultural aspect. And that and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I learned was that there's a great deal of meaning behind wearing a beautiful hat to church, and that it signifies the triumph over hardship for the women in their life. I just wanted to see what your response was to that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I've seen some productions of Crowns. I've seen a play called Crowns, and it was a book about crowns that shows some of the creative hats that the Black women in church have worn. And people, in my church, there are some people that are just known for their hats, and creativity that goes into them. It's part of establishing your identity and who you are. And some people, people are very accepting. If you could wear the biggest hat in the world that takes up 2 seats and people behind you can't see, and nobody's gonna get upset. Nobody's gonna get upset because that's Sister Bernadette's hat. In fact, we're thrilled to see that she's so comfortable that she can wear that hat. It's a lot of acceptance, I think, in our community of the people's need to express themselves creatively, and understanding why people do that and what they're saying, and applauding it and cheering them on. So not everyone has the confidence or the desire to wear, a hat that takes up 3 seats in church. But hey, if that's what you want to do, we'll make room, because we get it, especially if you have the kind of work that's all week long, you're being called by your first name and you're 50 years old, and you're a grandmother, and teenagers and 12-year-olds are calling you by your first name. That's pretty demeaning. That was one of our grievances for the Black workers, that they were old enough to be our grandparents, and our white colleagues, our white students, were calling them by their first names, but the white employees, the white adults, were being called Mr. and Miss. And what's wrong with this picture? Yeah. So you get treated like that all week. You're gonna wear that hat on Sunday, yeah, and everything else that says, I'm not defined by that uniform I wear in the week.
Yeah, Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll ask a question. I'm a big fan of Marilyn and all the authors in this book. And among the things that I love about this book is that it touches on so many different topics. And we talked about, 2 things today, that the whole notion of the Black table and how it represents the Black family, which is so timely because the Black History Month theme for this year is the Black family. But then there's the other piece about leadership. And I guess my question is it kind of 2 parts for some of the authors. Do you think, because if you know any of these women, they are by no means demure, shy women. They are forces of nature in their own rights. And I read the book, and as we've spoken, Marilyn, it was strategic the way you did what you did, being in the background and putting the men in the front. Do you think that your strategy would be different now than it was at that time, number one? And number two, as you are talking to sort of young college age activists now, kind of what advice do you give them based on your experience about how they engage the struggle and the protest now?
Wow, that's a powerful leadership. Aundrea, you want to take a stab, or I can go get started on it. We had basis for our belief that the leaders should not be bigger than the movement, and that was something from the civil rights era and Ella Baker. We had read these kinds of ideas about movements and leadership, so we were pretty convinced that it was not going to be a problem. We were not going to make it be a problem that we were not being recognized. We were focused on the mission, right? And so I think that's definitely something we would still say, to focus on the mission no matter what. Having lived through, personally lived through, I do recognize where I have certainly not accomplished some of the things that I think I could have in my life because of sort of chronically putting myself back, as a habit, and not really exploring my potential in the way that younger women today, it just comes naturally because they didn't grow up with that idea, that repression. So certainly I'm just applauding my younger sisters for their, they're just not even questioning that they should be leaders and out front, there's not even a question for them. I don't think they have to fight back as much the voices in the head that are saying you shouldn't be really doing this, you should be stepping back. I could be wrong because maybe that is a persistent problem. We know women still have these glass ceilings and these issues in their careers where they just unconsciously are being told to step back, right? So definitely we need to use our potential, and we need to go forward. We don't need to go back to the days where we would be downplaying our abilities so that somebody else could feel good about themselves. So my advice to young women is, build on what we have accomplished. We have shown that women can do these things. Build on it and go, but keep your eye on the mission. So I would say that would be my main answer. Now, Aundrea, you might have a different thought, or any of the other co-authors.
A number of I just opened my eyes and see today the number of women, in particular the number of African American women who have not taken a back seat in their particular fields. I'm thinking right now of all of the African American female attorneys general that there are, for example, in the United States today. I'm thinking of all of the African American females who are rising in the political sphere and running for office and winning, and all the women in general, regardless of whether they're African American or not. So I'm not so sure that female leadership is as much of an issue today as it may have been 50 years ago when we were at Swarthmore College. That's my sense anyway.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Do any of the other authors who are here want to speak to that? Is it just Joyce and Myra? Do we have anybody else too?
I don't think so. Not in the audience.
Yeah. Joyce or Myra, do you want to jump in?
Well, this is Joyce. I agree with Marilyn and Aundrea that we've seen tremendous progress among women, and African American women in particular. But I do often think about our African American men and some of the issues that they have had to deal with. I believe they are much more of a threat to others than we women are. And I think for that reason, they have really suffered an awful lot. And we have to continue to think about why and how we can work within the system or work with them to really get a good sense of what's going on in their heads and how we can give them the kind of confidence that we have in terms of their potential to move forward socially and economically.
Thank you. Thanks, Joyce.
Mm-hmm.
Myra, no pressure, but if you wanted to jump in, feel free. She may not be.
Yeah, she is.
Thank you. That was a great question. And goodness, I can't believe, I know we just have a couple minutes left, and I know we don't have time to really get into this, but one of the things that I really want to say that Marilyn and Aundrea and I talked about a little bit was again, the need right now, this huge need for community, and the type of sisterhood that you've been talking about, we've been talking about here, I think is just, it's so important right now. You know, and I know there were stories in the book that just really touched me when, you know, someone had just gotten to college and that feeling of aloneness and, you know, who do I share, you know, with? And I guess I just wanted to put out there that I know for me that this conversation has been so inspiring in that way, to remember, you know, the importance of community and also that importance of a bigger purpose, that I just feel as if this hour has really brought us, you know, closer to that understanding of how important that is, especially in times like this when people are so isolated. So I know we have to hop off, but if Marilyn or Aundrea, if you just wanted to touch into that before we go, that would be lovely.
Definitely purposeful living. You know, it's hard for me to imagine ever living and not having a purpose. You know, it would be something like an unimaginable splurge to be able to not be purposeful at any time of the day or night. But that's an extreme also. So I'm not going to suggest that for everybody. But the purpose that our nation, what's going on in our nation, it couldn't be more severe, the needs that we have. First with the pandemic, the health challenges, environmental challenges that are part of this weather disaster that's going on right now that people don't want to acknowledge, the political disasters. We almost lost our Constitution, and people are still in denial, saying that, you know, maybe it wasn't so big a deal. We have every kind of catastrophe to create purpose. And so, you know, we just live in constant awareness of the bigger purpose. There's never a time, I think, where we feel that we're free to ignore what's going on around us. We just don't seem to have that luxury. If you live in a Black community, as I do, you go for a walk and you see everywhere the needs and in every kind of need. And there's no way that you can disconnect with whatever you're doing from the bigger purpose. You know, people are hurting, people are marginalized, people are hopeless, people are sick. You know, you can just go on, or it could be absolutely depressing, and it's everywhere around us. And people are feeling so hopeless. And because we have stories of seeing the ability to bring about change, to be in a difficult situation where you're up against odds and all the odds are against you, and you've seen things change, maybe not perfect, but you can look back 50 years and see, you know, we have a Black woman president at the college we fought. At that time, there was not a single Black professional other than the people cooking and cleaning the grounds 50 years ago when we started out. Now there are professors with tenure writing books, retiring, the college provost, the college general counsel, the head of financial aid. I mean, you go through all the top administrators, the college president is on her second term, all African Americans. This is in a 50 year, you know, when you live to see that kind of change take place. And we alumni who are poor college students, right, with scholarships, are now creating an endowment fund that's, you know, moving over $500,000 so that we can ensure that there's Black studies forever. I mean, that is hope. And it makes you see that you can work for a cause and help bring about change. And that's what we want to spread to people, that it's worth it. It can be really worth it if God spares your life to live long enough to see change is possible. And it helps you to refrain from being disconnected and isolated and feeling that you don't have purpose. And, I still get calls from mothers to help my 16-year-old with his math. And, we get on Zoom and we do the math. And I'm like, you are going to pass this math class. I've been doing this too long, and all the teachers on the line know, we don't ever stop doing that. We don't ever say no. And that's connecting to purpose for me.
Ah, beautifully, beautifully. Oh, that was perfect. Aundrea, how about you? Did you want to jump in there?
Just to hopefully our book will inspire kids today, young people today, individuals who are like I was, feeling really alone and just alone. And it's, as Marilyn mentioned, it's worse today because we're all locked in our houses practically, and we're living through Zoom. And it's a substitute, but it's not the same as being able to be present with someone. And so I just think that reaching out and calling someone that you think may be having a difficult time is a wonderful use of your time and gives you purpose to help someone else. My sister is a psychologist and, psychiatrist, and she said that the mental health today, especially amongst teens, is getting worse and worse and worse, and that reaching out to people personally is really important, not just on a text message or the telephone, the Zoom screen. So that's one thing that we should do as well, reach out and touch.
Right. And I just want to give a shout out to Myra. She texted on the chat just a minute ago that her mic isn't working. That's why she couldn't respond. But I'm always bragging about people, but Myra is still, all the rest of us have retired. Myra is still going down to Grady Hospital in Atlanta. She's an oncologist and a professor of medicine, and she's still going down there, taking care of people who are dying of diseases that, that are unspeakable stuff. And she doesn't go every day, but she's just giving and giving. She has never stopped. And so she can't pick up the phone and Zoom. I mean, she's not getting through to us, but she's an inspiration to all of us. When you talk about connecting to purpose, she and her patients, she says she's never going to stop serving her patients as long as she can do it. So give a big shout out to her.
Oh goodness, I am so sad to close out this circle. What a wonderful, wonderful time. Marilyn and Aundrea, thank you so much. And also to Joyce and Myra and to everyone that's here from Mango. To me, I know, like you were just saying, this isn't the same as being in person, but I feel so uplifted after being in your presence and reading your book and hearing your stories and really connecting back to what's most important. And I thank you so much. And I thank everyone who was here, people who have been here before or for the first time. We do meet every Wednesday at this time for Mango authors come on, and just like today, they just share their wisdom, they share their hearts. It's a really wonderful community. I invite you all to come back. And thank you so much. What a celebration this was.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank all the sisters that came on. They came from far and wide.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Okay, good job, Marilyn and Aundrea. Very proud of you.
Excellent, excellent.
Oh, that's Texas. Oh, there's Texas. You got
Hi there, Grace.